With a smile while serving tea, the sweet old lady gave me a choice. Work for her cartel or die. James sat frozen, his fingers still curled around the delicate handle of the porcelain teacup. The steam rising from the Earl Grey smelled of bergamot and comfort, a sharp contrast to the words that had just hung in the air between them. Mrs. Kowalski, 74 years old with hair the color of spun silver and a fondness for floral aprons, did not blink. She simply pushed a plate of snickerdoodles closer to him, her expression as warm and inviting as a grandmother expecting a hug. "Eat, James," she said softly. "You look pale." James tried to swallow, but his throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I do not understand," he stammered, his voice cracking. He looked around the kitchen. It was the epitome of cozy. Embroidered dish towels, a humming vintage refrigerator, and a calendar featuring kittens in baskets. It was the kitchen of a woman who knitted socks for the church bazaar, not a woman who had just claimed ownership of the largest methamphetamine distribution network in Schuylkill County. "It is quite simple, dear," Mrs. Kowalski said, settling into the oak chair opposite him. The warmth in her eyes did not vanish, which was terrifying. It merely hardened, like glaze on a ceramic tile. "I have grown too old to manage the logistics alone. My nephew, God rest his soul, was sloppy with the spreadsheets. You, however, have watched you. You are a software developer. You understand optimization. You understand efficiency." James pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the linoleum. "Mrs. Kowalski, I am going to leave now. I am going to go back to my house, and we're going to pretend this joke did not happen." "Sit down, James." The command was not shouted. It was whispered with the weight of absolute authority. James stopped. "You have been watching my garage for 3 weeks," she continued, taking a sip of her tea. "You have a spreadsheet on your laptop titled Neighborhood Traffic. You have logged license plates, timestamps. You have photos on your phone." She sighed, a sound of disappointment. "Curiosity is a dangerous trait in a small town, James. Usually, when people stick their noses where they do not belong, my associates handle it. They are not gentle men." James felt the blood drain from his face. The peaceful rental house next door, his sanctuary after the divorce, suddenly felt like a coffin. "But I like you," she added, smiling again, "and I need a new logistics manager. The pay is $20,000 a month. Cash. You will modernize my inventory system. You will route the shipments. You will keep your head down. And if I say no," James whispered. Mrs. Kowalski picked up a cookie and broke it in half with a sharp snap. "Then you are a liability, and liabilities are liquidated. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to be rich or if you want to be a memory. Now please try the snickerdoodles. I used extra cinnamon." James stumbled back to his own house, his legs feeling like lead. The distance between their front porches was only 30 feet, but it felt like crossing a minefield. He locked his front door, then the deadbolt, then the chain. He backed away into his living room, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He needed to think. He needed to pack. He needed to call the police. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency dial. But then he remembered the way the local patrol car would slow down every morning as it passed Mrs. Kowalski's house. He remembered seeing Officer Miller waving at her while she watered her hydrangeas. Community loyalty, the landlord had told him. Neighbors looking out for neighbors. James lowered the phone. If he called the locals and they were on her payroll, he would not make it to the station. He paced the length of his small living room. He was trapped. The reality of his situation began to sink in, heavy and suffocating. Mrs. Kowalski was not just guessing about him. She knew everything. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Your alimony payment is 2 months overdue, James. $4,200. We can fix that." James dropped the phone on the couch as if it were burning hot. She knew about the alimony. She knew about the debt. He walked to the window, keeping his body hidden behind the curtains, and peered out. Across the street, A gray sedan was parked. It had been there yesterday and the day before. Inside, a man was reading a newspaper, but his eyes were fixed on James's front door. James went to the back window. In the alleyway, two men were smoking cigarettes, leaning against Mrs. Kowalski's garage. One of them looked up, straight at James's window, and offered a slow, mocking wave. He retreated to the center of the room, gripping his hair. He was a rat in a maze, and she was the scientist watching from above. The psychological weight was crushing. He thought about his life before this, the failing marriage, the mediocre career, the crushing anonymity of the city. He had come here to hide, to heal, to find simplicity. Instead, he had walked into a spider's web. A terrible thought began to take root in his mind. 20,000 a month. It would solve everything. The debt would vanish. The alimony would be paid. He could buy a real house somewhere far away eventually. All he had to do was write code. Just numbers on a screen. He would not have to touch the drugs. He would not have to see the addicts. He could just be the back-end guy. "I say not do it," he said aloud, his voice trembling in the empty room. "I'm not a criminal." But as the sun began to set, casting long, prison bar shadows across his floor, the resolve began to crumble. He was alone. He was broke. He was terrified. Mrs. Kowalski had stripped him of his dignity with a plate of cookies. She had presented his life to him, a catalogue of failures, and offered a golden parachute. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The screen glowed in the twilight. There it was, the spreadsheet he had made, the evidence of his curiosity, the reason he was in this mess. He stared at the data, the rows and columns of dates, times, and license plates. He felt small. He felt defeated. He reached for a bottle of whiskey on the shelf, poured a glass, and drank it straight, trying to numb the panic that was clawing at his throat. He was going to say yes. He had to. There was no other way out. It was 2 a.m. The whiskey bottle was half empty, but James was wide awake. The alcohol had not dulled his fear. It had sharpened his focus into a jagged, manic edge. He was staring at the spreadsheet again. November 14th, PA plate JKL 445. 11:15 p.m. arrival. 11:30 p.m. departure. November 15th, NJ plate RRT 992. 2 a.m. arrival. 2:20 a.m. departure. Mrs. Kowalski had praised him for this. She had called him efficient. She had offered him a job because she thought he understood patterns. "You understand optimization," she had said. James leaned closer to the screen. He highlighted the rows, sorting them by arrival frequency. He cross-referenced the license plates with the quick notes he had made about vehicle types. Pickup trucks on Tuesdays. Sedans on Fridays. The pattern was not just a schedule, it was a hierarchy. He realized something that made his breath hitch. Mrs. Kowalski was arrogant. She was brilliant, yes, and ruthless, but she was a creature of habit who had operated unopposed for 40 years. She believed her protection came from fear and money. She did not understand the digital footprint she was creating. She thought this spreadsheet was a resume. James realized it was a map. He started typing furiously, pulling up the photos he had taken, the ones she knew about. He zoomed in on the faces of the drivers. He used basic open-source intelligence tools, searching the license plates that were visible. He found social media profiles. He found connections. Within an hour, he did not just have a log of traffic. He had the nodes of the entire network. And then he saw it. The fatal flaw. In her confidence, she had admitted to him that she was the head. She had explicitly stated the nature of the business. She had given him the deadline. "She thinks she bought me," James whispered. "She thinks I'm desperate." He was desperate, but he was also insulted. She had looked at him and seen a weak man who would fold for money. She had underestimated the one thing James actually had left: his professional pride. He was not just a code monkey. He was a systems analyst. And he had just analyzed her system and found a critical vulnerability, her. He looked out the window. The gray sedan was still there. The guards were still in the alley. If he tried to leave with his car packed, they would stop him. If he walked out the front door with a suitcase, they would grab him. He was trapped in the house, and the clock was ticking down to noon. But then the twist twisted back on him. As he prepared to save the data to a cloud drive, his internet connection cut out. The Wi-Fi icon spun and turned into a dead globe. He checked his phone. No service. James froze. She had not just watched him. She had signal jammers. Or she had cut the line. She was isolating him completely, ensuring that he could not send the data out digitally. She was forcing him to physically come to her to accept the job. The hope that had flared in his chest was extinguished. He could not email the FBI. He could not upload the evidence. The data was stuck on his hard drive, and he was stuck in the house. The only way the truth would leave this property was if he carried it out. And there were armed men standing between him and the road. He sank to the floor, clutching the laptop. He had the weapon to destroy her, but he was locked in a cage with the beast. The silence of the house was deafening. James sat on the floorboards, the laptop humming against his chest. It was 3:45 a.m. The darkness outside was absolute, save for the orange glow of the street lamp illuminating the hood of the gray sedan. He closed his eyes and thought about the snickerdoodles, the casual cruelty. Outsiders who do not mind their own business tend not to stay long. He was not a hero. He was just a guy who wrote code. But the idea of sitting across from that woman every week, taking her blood money, becoming her pet, it made him feel physically ill. James opened his eyes. He crawled to the back of the house, to the laundry room. It had a small window, high up, that looked out onto a dense patch of overgrown rhododendrons separating his yard from the neighbor on the other side. Not Kowalski, but the empty lot that backed up to the woods. He did not pack a bag. He did not take clothes. He took only his laptop, his car keys, and a kitchen knife that felt ridiculously light in his hand. He opened the window. It groaned. He paused, heart-stopping, waiting for a shout or a gunshot. Silence. He squeezed through the frame, dropping into the wet dirt of the flower bed. The cold December air bit through his thin sweater. He did not stand up. He belly crawled through the mud, pushing through the thick bushes, scratching his face on the branches. He moved away from the alley, away from the guards, pushing deeper into the woods behind the subdivision. He hiked for 2 miles in the dark, stumbling over roots, guided only by the distant sound of the highway. When he finally emerged onto the shoulder of Route 901, he was covered in mud, shivering violently, and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He did not flag down a car. He could not trust a random driver. He walked. He walked another 3 miles to the all-night truck stop where he had seen Greyhound buses park. He did not take a bus. He found a payphone, a relic, and called a taxi from a town 20 miles away. When the cab arrived, the driver looked at him with suspicion. "State Police Barracks," James said, shoving a wad of wet cash through the divider. "In Harrisburg. Not the local one. Take me to headquarters." The ride took an hour. James clutched the laptop the entire time, expecting a black SUV to ram them off the road. He walked into the station at dawn. He looked like a madman, muddy, bloody, wild-eyed. The officer at the desk reached for his holster. "I have the layout," James rasped, slamming the laptop onto the high counter. "I have the distribution network. I have the names. And I have the head of the snake." The interrogation lasted 6 hours. The federal agents arrived by helicopter. James refused to drink their coffee. He refused to sit near the window. He walked them through the spreadsheet, the photos, the network he had uncovered. He gave them the layout of the house, the garage, the guard positions. The raid happened that evening. James was not there to see it. He was in a safe house in Maryland, watching the local news on a small television. The footage was shaky, shot from a helicopter. Armored vehicles smashed through the white picket fence. Flashbangs illuminated the quaint Cape Cod house. Men in tactical gear swarmed the porch where he had stood yesterday. They brought her out in handcuffs. Mrs. Kowalski was wearing her floral house dress. Her hair was slightly mussed. As the agents led her toward the armored van, she looked directly at the news camera. For a second, the image froze on the screen. She was not angry. She was not crying. She looked disappointed, like a teacher whose student had failed a simple test. The bust was historic. 30 kilograms of cocaine, piles of cash in the walls, and a server room in the basement that linked to cartels in 3 states. James was a star witness. He was given a new identity. He moved to a city in the Midwest, flat, gray, anonymous. 6 months later, James sat in a coffee shop, working on his laptop. He had a boring job for a logistics company. It was safe. "Excuse me?" James flinched, his hand jerking toward his pocket. An elderly woman was standing there. She had white hair and a kind smile. She was holding a dropped scarf. "You dropped this, young man," she said sweetly. James stared at her. He stared at her soft hands, her warm eyes, her gentle demeanor. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could not breathe. He saw the scarf, but he also saw a mask. He saw the monster beneath the skin. He snatched the scarf without touching her hand. "Keep it away from me," he snapped, his voice harsh and loud. The woman recoiled, hurt and confused. The other patrons stared at James with disgust, a young man yelling at a sweet old lady. James grabbed his laptop and ran out the door, into the cold street. He stood on the sidewalk, shaking, realizing that Mrs. Kowalski had kept her promise. She had told him he would be a memory, and she was right. The James who believed in kindness, who trusted neighbors, who liked apple pie, that James was dead. He had survived the cartel, but the innocence was gone, replaced by a permanent, freezing winter in his soul.